Donald Trump says that his unpopular decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital signals a new beginning toward peace in the Middle East. How? And why now? Plus, avoiding a government shutdown. Can the parties work together to keep the bureaucracy open? A lot to talk about on this edition of Politicking. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King. In an already busy month in Washington, President Trump opened up another battlefront, this one in the Middle East. Reversing decades of policy, the president officially announced his plan for the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The international community has condemned the act and warned of a myriad of complications it'll cause to the ongoing peace effort between Israel and Palestine. This as the U.S. government faces a potential shutdown the end of this week, and while the House and Senate are in talks to pass the largest tax reform bill in modern history. We'll try to tackle all this first with Representative Jody Arrington, Republican of Texas, a member of the House Committee on the Budget. The congressman joins me from Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol. First, before we talk about taxes and the shutdown, Congressman, what's your take on the switching of the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
I think it's long overdue. I think what makes this president unique, and I think what's refreshing, and the reason why people sent him to Washington was because he was committed and has proven to be committed to delivering on his campaign promises. That shouldn't be a radical notion, but in fact it is. And because presidents have been making that campaign promise for years, and Congress overwhelmingly supported this move in 1995 and two other times since, bipartisan effort. The lack of moving the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel has not furthered or in any way added value to the peace process and negotiation. So this is just another example of a non-conventional, non-politician president doing what he actually said he was going to do, and I support it.
How will it bring it closer to peace in the Middle East?
Well, I don't know that it will bring us closer, but I don't think it's going to do anything to prevent or hinder peace negotiations. Again, for 20 years it hasn't done anything, and so why put it off? You've got Jerusalem acting as the capital with respect to the legislature, the Supreme Court, the Prime Minister. So, I mean, we've all but recognized it through Congress. We just haven't moved the embassy. You know, as long as it doesn't, we've got safety measures in for our folks there in the State Department. I support it.
All right, on taxes, what will be the major difference in conference between the House and the Senate?
Well, I think there's some good on both sides of it. I think the general framework is the same. I think, number one, we need to simplify the code. That was one of the big missions as we set out to reform the tax code. So compressing the brackets, the Senate didn't do that, the House did. I think that's in the interest of simplification. We need to do away with the alternative minimum tax. That just complicates things. And I think we need to make the tax cuts permanent. I think it's a huge mistake to punt for another year in terms of implementing them. Folks need to feel the effects immediately. They will if we put these things in play in 2018. They'll actually keep more of their money in January. And so I think that's important. The death tax has been lingering. Bush repealed it temporarily. It came back. It's an unfair double tax. It's un-American. We ought to put a stake in the heart of that. There are other things that are going to be debated, like SALT and other provisions where we'll probably split the baby, and like on mortgage interest deduction and other provisions. But all in all, I think we're on track to get it to the president's desk and give the hardworking Americans an early Christmas present.
The Republican Party has historically opposed federal deficits. Everyone says these tax bills are going to rack up at least $1 trillion more in federal deficit. Are you comfortable with that?
You know, it's a great question, and I think it's a great discussion to have. I am a deficit hawk. I am on the Budget Committee, and I'm proud that we passed a budget out of the House that for the first time in 20 years actually reduced deficit spending. We cut $200 billion in mandatory spending. But the question is a legitimate one. And what I would say is, if with just 0.5% of growth, if we dynamically score this tax bill with 0.5%, we'll more than cover that $1 trillion. And with being stuck at 2%, we've seen 3% GDP growth the last 2 quarters, almost 3 quarters. After Reagan's tax cuts, we saw an average of 4% GDP growth long term. So if we just get 0.5%, we've covered. I'm comfortable with that. But if anybody wants to put a provision in that says if we don't cover the deficit, then we should have a trigger for increase in the tax, I'm against that. What we ought to do is have automatic spending cuts, because that's in fact the problem, is that we've spent ourselves into oblivion. We're $20 trillion in debt. So there are ways to get at it. If you wanted an extra control in place, it shouldn't be to hike up taxes. It ought to be to keep stimulating the economy with low taxes and cut spending, because that's what we're desperately in need of. And I haven't seen the will in Congress to do anything about that. Again, that's the real problem, Larry.
More with Congressman Jody Arrington after the break. Senator Flake of Arizona says he's got a firm commitment from Senate leadership to protect the so-called dreamers before he agreed to vote yes on the tax bill. Do you support that?
I do not support it. I do think we have to act responsibly for the DACA recipients, and the president has given us until March, and it would be irresponsible not to do it beyond that deadline. But right now, we've got to get tax reform. I don't want anything to get in the way of or to distract the Senate or any of the conferees from getting the ball over the line, as we say in Texas, on tax reform. And then we've got to fund the government. We've got to rebuild the military, make sure they're ready. Everybody knows there are tremendous threats, immediate threats in the Korean Peninsula. I think those things are much more imperative right now that we deal with, but we'll deal with DACA, and we'll do that before March. And I'm certainly committed, and I know my colleagues in the Republican conference in the House are as well.
In a book published last month called The Last Republicans, George W. Bush, a man you served,
yes,
declared that Donald Trump does not know what it means to be president. The same book, his father was quoted as describing Trump as a blowhard. What are your comments?
I have immense respect for President George W. Bush, and I wouldn't be where I am today had I not served with him, and very proud to have served with him. I do think that these are different times, and the folks throughout this country, on both sides of the philosophical aisle, if you will, they don't want business as usual. They want to change this established culture in Washington that has not allowed for much progress for our country, and that includes partisan gridlock. And I think the people voted for somebody that would turn it on its head and would shake it up. And they're obviously good and bad with that. There are always downsides to sending a bull in a china shop, but overwhelmingly, the benefits of having a non-politician up here changing the culture to one that's not business as usual, and doing everything that he can, like we talked about on the Jerusalem decision, doing everything that he can to do what he promised in his campaign is refreshing. So I respect both men, and I think the times call for different styles of leadership. I think we've got the leader that we need today to make the changes necessary to get our country back, get it on the right direction.
Jody, thanks for your time
Yes,
today.
sir. Thanks, Larry. Always good to be with you.
GOP leaders in the House and Senate will attempt a reconciliation of their 2 bills this week and next, and are holding to their promise to have a final bill on the president's desk by the end of the year. This as the United States also faces a government shutdown this month, and arguments over just how exactly to keep it funded and remain open. Can the parties get together to make it happen and work with the administration as well? Let's talk about that with Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee, ranking member of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice. He also serves on the House Ethics Committee. He joins me from Washington. Thanks for being with us again, Steve.
Nice to be with you, Larry.
The President has described the pending tax overhaul bill as a big, beautiful Christmas present. How do you look at it?
It's a big, beautiful Christmas present to Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, and to other people who are billionaires and multi-millionaires and their children. It's the elimination of the inheritance tax, or even doubling it, which is what one of the bills does, gives a lot of money to a lot of people who are just part of what I call the lucky sperm club. They didn't work hard for their money. They don't need the money to make jobs. They're not going to make jobs in America. They're being given money that has historically gone into government purposes. And when we reduce the government spending, and this has got an addition to the debt of over $1 trillion, the overall bill, it's going to cause government services to suffer. And people who need monies to go to college, to get Pell Grants, who need SNAP payments, who need have high health care costs that they right now can itemize and deduct but won't be able to. People with high property taxes or income taxes in California and New York will be paying more and more money. Most of the tax benefits go to the wealthiest who don't need it. This is a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to the wealthy. And it's a time when we're taking money away from the government, when the government needs more and more money for crime in the inner cities, for natural disasters that we're having because of climate change with fires in California and hurricanes around the Atlantic coast and other climate tragedies, and other problems that we're facing with retirees having more and more of a difficult time living, and we're not giving government pensioners benefits, increasing their pensions by much because we don't have the money. And Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security are jeopardized by this bill.
If Congress passes this, will any Democrats support it?
I can't imagine a single Democrat, because we stand for the middle class and we stand for fairness in taxation and for government doing services to help people in need. And this bill does just the opposite.
The president says that if the Democrats oppose it, they're going to lose very big next year in the 2018 elections.
I think the president sees it totally wrong. I think the Republicans will lose big because the middle class is going to wake up and see that this bill's for the wealthy and a huge transference of wealth. Do you have votes?
Are they voting now? Do you have to go?
Yeah, I have to go and vote. I could be back in a minute.
Okay, we'll pause it and come back in a minute.
Thank you.
While the congressman votes, we'll take this break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Politicking. We'll continue the conversation with Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat of Tennessee. What did you just vote on?
Well, we voted on the impeachment that was brought by Al Green, a privileged resolution that was laid to the table by the Republicans. It used impeachment for different grounds than I did in H.R. 621. We went on obstruction of justice, emoluments clauses, and damages to the freedom of the press and the judiciary. His went on more personal behavior. And I think most members think mine is the better resolution. We've got additional sponsors coming on each and every day. But I voted with Al Green not to have it tabled because I thought it should go to committee.
And how did the vote come out?
It was tabled.
Yeah.
The Republicans and the Democratic leadership both didn't want to have it see the light of day, so it didn't. But there were about 60 people voted no, and that's a strong statement that there are at least 60 people that think that impeachment is a valid issue at this time. And there are others that think that do too, but politically they're not ready to cast that kind of vote.
You recently went to the well of the House, asked representatives to prevent the president from firing Robert Mueller. Can you do that?
Well, you can't prevent him from firing, but you can, and I'm the sponsor of a bill with Walter Jones that says if he fires the special counsel has a right to go into court and to appeal his firing based on the grounds, and the grounds have to be for cause. And there's another bill that says on the front end he can't fire him without cause, and then he still has to go to court to get approval. Both of them give protections to the special counsel, and I think they should be there, and we can do that legislatively to say that he has to have cause. And we may take action on that next week as well.
Are you going to prevent the shutdown of the government?
That's a tough question. You know, the Republicans are divided into two camps, and one of the camps is the Freedom Caucus that's against government spending in general, and they're not going along with the main group of the Republicans, and the Republicans and Paul Ryan aren't willing to work with us on the DACA kids and on children's health care plan to be extended fully, and for community health centers. And unless we can get guarantees on DACA, community health centers, and the Children's Health Care Plan, we're not going to go along with their short-term CR. And if that happens, it could be a shutdown.
What do you think of the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital?
I think it's a mistake for us to do it. I think that no other country recognizes Jerusalem as the capital, and I think the main thing we need there is peace in the Middle East. This will not help with peace. In fact, I think it'll probably result in the Palestinians engaging in some kind of intifada. And we've had two before. This could be a third one that'll cost lives and cause irreparable suffering and disagreement that will make peace less likely. Peace is the main objective in not having a capital of the United States embassy in Jerusalem.
Trump has now explicitly endorsed Roy Moore for the Senate. That vote is next Tuesday in Alabama. The Republican Party has now come back to supporting him financially. What do you make of that?
Well, I agree with Michael Gerson that the soul of the Republican Party has been sold to support a man who's been accused with valid claims that were substantiated closely thereafter of, I think it's about 9 or 8 women who are underage that Moore had relations with, that he should not be allowed to go to the United States Senate. But if it weren't for that, Dayenu, he had violated the orders of the court in not taking down the 10 Commandments that he posted illegally, and he was ordered to take them down. He didn't do it. He also violated court orders when he was told the clerks in Alabama not to issue any certificates of marriage to gay couples. And the courts ordered him to do that, and he told them not to. A man who doesn't respect the judiciary, who doesn't respect the orders of the Supreme Court and higher level judiciary courts should not be in the United States Senate.
Are you surprised that the Republicans are backing him?
Well, politics sometimes is about the ends and that doesn't matter about the means. They want his vote. I think he'll be a poison to them, and it's a shame. And I don't think Bear Bryant would be for him.
How do you feel about your fellow congressman's resignation, John Conyers?
I think he did the right thing by resigning. I think he did the wrong thing if the allegations that are been made are truthful. They seem to be consistent, and I've read them in horror. It's a shame. He did so much good. He's a civil rights leader who did a lot for Dr. King's holiday, for civil rights and for civil justice, and he was a friend, and I was honored to serve with him. I just regret this conduct that he's alleged to have participated in on the side.
Steve, always loved talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry. Sei gesund.
Sei gesund. Turning now to the ongoing Russia probe, the White House suffered some bad news on this front when former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian officials. The president's critics immediately began talking about, and for some hoping, for obstruction of justice charges to be leveled against the president. But constitutional scholar Alan Dershowitz says not so fast and warns Trump critics against putting hope over reality. Let's find out what that all means by joining us, my old friend, Alan Dershowitz. He's the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus, a distinguished chair to hold. Before we discuss the obstruction ideas and everything, Alan, quickly, your thoughts on the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital?
Well, it's about time. Every president, when runs for president, swears he's going to do it, and then they all break their promises. What does that say about American policy? Finally, President Trump has carried out his promise, and he did the right thing. It was a perfect response to what President Obama did in a cowardly way when he was a lame duck president last December. He allowed the UN to pass a one-sided resolution that basically declared much of Jerusalem, the Western Wall, Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, the Jewish Quarter, to be illegally occupied territory. And that's what changed the status quo, what Obama did. So what Trump has done is to restore some balance and to come back to a situation where, as he said in his statement, we can have negotiations and discussions about what the borders of Jerusalem are going to be. So I think it was a courageous act. It was the right act. He should be praised. Obama should be condemned for what he did to change the status quo and undo the balance. This will, I think, help peace. What Obama did hurt peace.
You think this will help peace?
I think it restores the balance. It puts the Palestinians and the Israelis in a situation where both sides have incentives to come and negotiate. Under the UN resolution, which Obama engineered, the Palestinians had no incentive to negotiate. They had control of all the Jewish holy places. The Israelis really had to come to them on bended knees and say, please give us back the Western Wall, give us back the Jewish quarter, give us back our university and our hospital. That's no way to begin a serious negotiation.
Alan Dershowitz is my guest. More with him right after this. Now to current things. Ranking Senate Judiciary Committee member, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, says she sees an obstruction of justice case forming against Trump. What's your perspective?
Well, she may see it in her dreams and hopes, but in reality, under the Constitution, it's not going to happen unless they can prove that the president did what Nixon did. That is, tell his aides to lie, pay hush money to witnesses, destroy evidence. There's no evidence that, or suggestion even, that President Trump did that. You cannot indict or charge a president for obstruction of justice if the president merely exercised his constitutional authority. He has the power to pardon anybody he chooses. He has the power to fire anybody he chooses. The Supreme Court held that. In fact, they held unconstitutional a statute that tried to prevent the president from firing the Secretary of War during the Lincoln-Johnson term in office. So the president has the power to do that, and you can't turn the exercise of constitutional authority into an obstruction of justice crime.
But what about, aren't you concerned, Alan? Okay, I understand your constitutional facts. Aren't you concerned about all that's going on? Don't you
Sure.
have some respect for Mr. Mueller and the work he's trying to accomplish?
I do. I've known Mueller for a long time. We've been opposed to each other in some cases. He's a zealous, some say overzealous prosecutor. He's honest and honorable. I'm not criticizing him. He's not, at this point, try to indict the president or charge the president with obstruction. He would be very much subject to criticism if he ever did that, or if he tried to indict anybody under the Logan Act, which has been dead letter for almost 215 years. So I don't have any particular criticism at the moment. Mueller did the right thing by taking that FBI agent off the case who had sent the tweets. My criticism is not personal. It's institutional and constitutional.
Okay. Is it a crime, hypothetically, for a president to suggest to an FBI director that he look away at a certain case?
No, not only isn't it a crime, the president could have told him, you are instructed not to prosecute or investigate that case. Presidents from Thomas Jefferson to Abraham Lincoln to FDR to John Kennedy have all told prosecutors who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. President Obama told his attorney general not to prosecute people young kids who came over from Mexico. Presidents do that all the time, and you cannot charge a president with a crime for telling the Justice Department or the FBI who to investigate, who not to. We should probably change the system. It's not a good system, but under the law, the president has that authority.
But prosecutors can also make deals with people like Mr. Flynn to tell the whole story.
Right. And if they had anything on Flynn, they would not have indicted him for lying. The last thing a prosecutor ever wants to do is indict his main witness for lying, because he makes the witness worthless. You can't put on the witness stand somebody who's admitted lying and who's making a deal to save his son's skin. So if he had anything more serious, like they did against Nixon, Nixon was charged as an unindicted co-conspirator in a major conspiracy. He would have much preferred to charge Flynn with some kind of a conspiracy, but he didn't have the evidence to do that. So I don't think Flynn's going to be able to provide much useful information to Mueller. Of course, we don't know that for sure, and we're speculating both ways.
He could provide information without having to testify.
That's right. And that's where value comes in. If he could say, you should talk to so-and-so, or here's a document that I have, that can be very useful. But simply putting him on the witness stand is something a defense lawyer would be looking for. Defense lawyers love to cross-examine witnesses who've made a deal and who've made a deal under which they have to admit that they lied to the FBI.
All right, Trump posted a tweet in which he said, I had to fire Flynn because he lied to the vice president of the FBI. He has pled guilty to those lies. It's a shame because his actions occurred during the transition and they were lawful. Trump's outside attorney, John Dowd, now claims he wrote that tweet allegedly the first and only tweet ever composed for Donald Trump. What do you make of all of that?
It's strange. And, you know, lawyers shouldn't be writing tweets for their clients, and lawyers shouldn't be disclosing who wrote the tweet. That raises questions about lawyer-client privilege. This is not the way to handle a case of this kind, to have a lawyer say he wrote the tweet, whether he did or not. It just doesn't present a positive image of the lawyer-client relationship.
Mr. Trump also promoted your appearance on Fox and Friends, in which you called this the greatest witch hunt in U.S. political history. Was that your quote or his quote?
That's his quote. I don't believe this is a witch hunt. I think it's a misguided effort to try to use the criminal justice system in a place where we should be having a nonpartisan 9/11 type investigation. But I've never called it a witch hunt. In fact, when I was interviewed, I said I didn't think it was a witch hunt. So President Trump tweeted about me, but that was his own words, not my words.
All right, logically, Alan, overall, what do you make of this administration?
Well, I'm not a supporter. They've done some good things. They've done some not so good things. I think the Jerusalem thing is a very good thing. I think their efforts to make peace in the Middle East is a very positive development. I completely support it. I do not support the ban, the travel ban. I think it could have been done more artfully and in a more limited way. I'm not a fan of some of his tweets. I certainly am very critical of his support for Moore, who's running for the Senate, and critical of his retweeting material that was originally tweeted by a racist group in England. So, as with most presidents, I have a mixed picture, critical in some respects, supportive in other respects. I've had the same views about prior Republican presidents and even prior Democratic presidents.
Alan, as always, great talking with you.
Likewise. Good. Nice to see you.
Alan Dershowitz, we thank him for his time today, and we thank you for joining us on this edition of Politicking. Remember, you can join the conversation on my Facebook page or tweet me at King's Things. And don't forget to use the Politicking hashtag. And that's all for this edition of Politicking.